Okay, so I asked Perplexity FMC, that's Folk Made Cunning, and again, to sort of the steelman the point of view. So I'm going to be going through a lot of this, really going to the fundamentals of uh, problems in socionics in terms of how the information elements are conceived. And so this is returning to the internal external dichotomy in socionics, which is fundamental. The reason why it is so fundamental is that this affects how verting is understood. Because with thinking and sensing being defined as external, that means there can be no subjective side to thinking, nor a subjective side to sensing, even though the subjective side to sensing there's a name for that, qualia. And so if there cannot be a subjective side to thinking and not a subjective side to thinking, then what that means is that when you then come to define TI and SI, you can't say that those are subjective, but you have this problem of, oh, but they are introverted. And so then you have to change your definition of what introverting and introverted means. So, but we'll focus on this for now. So, and this is a way to do, this is a way of looking at it as, and again, it's a steel man analysis in that it's the opposite of a straw man, in that it's the best defense socionics can give to the objections that we've come up with. So, socionics says that thinking is 100% external. So, what would the consequences be if it actually was? And then, if those consequences are there or not, we can then see whether socionics is right or not, because it gives testable results, a testable hypothesis. So here we go. I'll read through this. Absolutely, here is a Steelman analysis. Actually, I like to say analysis. So I will say analysis of the socionics claim that all thinking, including introverted thinking, TI, is external, with a focus on the nuances of linguistic, empirical, and subjective thinking. This response will directly address the issues you raised: the conflation of logic with thinking, the mischaracterization of TI, and the theoretical consequences of the socionics position. It will include direct quotations from socionic sources, Jung, and relevant academic literature, and will maintain the highest standards of objectivity and depth. Oh, I really have to force it to be objective, because these FMCs can be sycophantic. So instead of saying man-made cunning, I say folk-made cunning, because there are some gals involved. Steelman analysis. Socionics claim that all thinking is external. The reason I say analysis is that lysis, I think that's splitting. Now, what does socionics actually say about thinking and TI? A. Socionics' definition of thinking as external. Socionics divides information elements into external, thinking and sensing, and internal, feeling and intuiting. So from a Jungian point of view, it's saying that thinking and sensing are extroverted and feeling and intuiting are introverted. Because in the Jungian point of view, introverted means subjective, inward, and extroverted means outward, empirical, and acting in the world. And it seems that the socionics sort of just goes with the acting in the world part, but I'll move on. Thinking and sensing are considered external or objective functions because they process information about the external world and its structure, whereas feeling and intuition are internal or subjective functions concerned with internal states and relationships. Okay. Socionics further defines introverted thinking, TI, or structural logic as structural logic is the ability to analyze and structure objects, phenomena, and situations according to their inherent properties and relationships. It seeks to understand the internal laws and principles that govern systems, but these laws are seen as objective, existing in the external world. Now I'm going to do other videos where this structural logic. Now David Kersey came up with strategic construction, which is one of the halves of the strategic building intellect. The other half being strategic coordination. Now, structural logic, you use that when you're building models and theories. How many models and theories do you think the STPs are creating? Models and theories are abstract. So, yet again, what we have are NTPs defining TI, how they use TI. And they use TI within the context of their NT temperament. And they use structural logic. STPs don't. Because structural logic is strategic construction. TI is a separate process. TI is subjective thinking. And in other videos, I'll explain that the subjective thinking of STPs is seen at its zenith in tactically sophisticated situations where everything changes because of the situation on the ground and the thinking on your feet. So the TI with SE, so it's all of the circumstances in the here and now, say different facts. So you have what the book says, the standard operating procedure, but the situation is different. And so because of the SE, as Dario defines a key part of SE as immersing in the present context. Well, if you are immersed in the present context and a big part of your ego is, I think for my flipping self, TI, and I'm going to do it my way, and I'm immersed in the context, and SE is acting on the here and the now instinctively, then you have a combination of thinking for yourself and that being really expedient and based on present circumstances. That is completely different from strategic construction, where you are operating in an abstract context, where that is a very concrete context, and the STP is being expedient. So, let's think of some tactical context for some high achieving STPs. So, fighter pilot, you could argue that the surgeon working very well under pressure, day traders, that these tactical operations where you have to think quickly on your feet, and you're not going off what you should do. You're going off this particular situation because you are immersed in that situation. The situational awareness. You're not making the way a Guardian would do it is they use B-side NE with the SI, and it would go, oh, this is like this situation in which I know how to do it. Because the Guardian is looking for safety. That's part of the SI. It's the SI working with NE. Oh no, what do I do? Oh, I'll do it like this that worked before, the way that I know. So the Guardian is using NE in comparing the present situation to another situation that it knew the right approach for, whereas the artisan is not doing that. The artisan is immersing itself in the present context, and because the artisan immersed in the present context, that present context sort of suggests its own actions to take. So, for example, now this is different. This is something from my experience that I personally find it harder to work out choreography than videography, because to me, the choreography suggests how the camera should be moved, because the choreography is the situation. And it's like, oh, if that's moving like that, then I can then move that synergetically, because then it's appropriate direction. So you can think that by being immersed in the present context, you're not thinking about how you should do it or that or even rules. It's the situation. You're so in the situation that it's almost the situation then suggests how you should then do it. And these are split-second thoughts. And so that is, but the common theme between that and this is strategic construction, in that I'm questioning models and that lot and going back to the fundamentals, and we're all just discussing models and that. And what do INTPs do? LIIs do when they read a theory, or they'll read someone's paper, and it's like, I don't agree with that. I think that should be that. And it'll be a springboard to their own thoughts. And then there'll be people out there, and when INTPs, LIIs object to a theory, and people tell them, you don't understand the theory, that's pretty offensive to an INTP. And what the INTP is like, no, I don't agree with it. It's not that I don't understand it, I don't agree with it. You get a lot of that with the INTP. Right. Now, when it comes to this socionics thing about thinking being external, I'm going to give you a load of subjects that don't agree with that. Right. Right then. My Enneagram one's coming through. Right. Okay, here we go. TI is logic in socionics. Yeah, that's a problem. I'm going to do a whole video on the fact that TI effectively becomes logico-mathematical intelligence. That's a problem, because that means you're making a testable claim, and socionics doesn't like to make testable claims, because if you make a testable claim, your theory could be proved to be wrong. And I'm going to show how the definitions that socionics people use of TI, and then I'm going to show a definition of logico-mathematical intelligence. What that then means is the types with TI that are have structural logic in the ego should be above average intelligence when it comes to logico-mathematical intelligence. And the EF types, those types which are suggestible TI, and those types which are vulnerable TI, shouldn't get anywhere near having an above average logico-mathematical intelligence. And so all you have to do is find an ESE or an SEE or an IEE or a EIE that is, say, a member of Mensa, or is a doctor or a lawyer where the average IQ is 130. So how can someone have an ESE type of information metabolism and demonstrate high logico-mathematical intelligence, yet that person is modeled as having one-dimensional structural logic? So yeah, I'll be going over that in future. Right. TI is concerned with the logical consistency and structure of information. and is focused on the objective relationships between elements, not on personal or subjective interpretations. Right. This results in a definition of TI that is logical in the sense of formal, structural, and impersonal, distinct from subjective, personal, context-dependent reasoning. Yeah, there will be a separate video where I go more into the actual definitions of logic that I use. So that's very different from subjective thinking. I mean, if you cross thinking with introversion, and Carl Jung banged on all the while about introversion being inward and subjective, you get subjective thinking. Okay, how do you go from subjective thinking to logic? But remember, Socionics wasn't going from that. Socionics was going from thinking is all external. And thinking gets to logic because you have NTPs describing how they think. Because NTPs use a lot of logic in their theories. I'm using logic, well, I'm using at least reasoning in this video. And in this video, there will be bits where you'll say, "I don't agree with that, Ben." Okay, okay, I agree with that reasoning, Ben, but that's where you're subjective. Your reasoning is coloured by this. Right. Oh, I can see your Enneagram 6 at play. Right. Right, the Steel Man. Because I don't want to cook the books. Steel Man. What if thinking were external? Subjunctive. Yeah. So what would happen if there was no subjective side to thinking? Because remember, Socionics made it clear all thinking is external. Now, there's many kinds of thinking, but we're going to focus on thinking by a thought. Because I remember hearing a certain Socionics ILE say that thinking is external and does not need to be reinterpreted. What is subtext? Why do people read texts differently? Why do people read between the lines? Why are there all of these studies on and different analyses of Shakespeare? Right. If all thinking were external, all logical, analytic, and structural statements would be interpreted identically by all rational agents, regardless of internal frameworks or personal content. If someone states the train leaves at 5, the logical structure and implications will be universally understood. Yeah, but you have to know what a train is. Right. But I mean, it's not the best example, but again, this is doing the Steelman version. Reduction of miscommunication in logic. Disagreements about logical or analytic content will be minimized, arising only from differences in available data or definitions, not from subjective interpretation. Yeah. I mean, one of the other ones I talked about this is, yes, values. Values. There would be a difference because of values. Again, this is the Steelman approach where I say we because it's me and the FMC. Ben, you just asked the question. Yeah, but I had to curate it. And plus, I know this already, but it's it structured it. Right. Because I've been banging on about it for years. Arising only from differences in fact. Right, okay, so persistence of disagreement due to values or focus. Yeah, that would be one reason why. However, as you correctly note, disagreements, because I wanted to make it even more of a Steelman, because I wanted to put, yes, but you can get disagreements. It's not as if it was 100% external, everyone would agree, because people have different values. And so from an NLP point of view, neuro-linguistic programming, not natural language processing or whatever it is, but neuro-linguistic programming, there are values and then there are criteria. And so the criteria for evaluating something, if it were 100% external, you might read it the same. You would read it the same, but your evaluated criteria would be different. However, as you correctly note, disagreements could still arise from value differences, priorities, or focus. For instance, two people might agree on the logical structure of a problem, but disagree on which aspect is most important based on his or her values or interests. I did try to make it be grammatically correct. We're not only logical beings, we're also valuing beings, and our values shape what we attend to and how we interpret information. Charles Taylor. Right. Don't know who that is. Right. Consequences for literary analysis and criticism. Objective analysis of logical structure. Literary critics would agree on the logical structure of arguments or reasoning within the text, as these would be seen as external and universally accessible. Subjectivity in thematic or value-based analysis. This is all if thinking were 100% external, if there was no subjectivity in it. However, interpretation of themes, motives, or significance would remain subjective, as these are rooted in values and internal frameworks. This is the Stillman version. The Strawman version would be, oh, no one would ever disagree. No one would ever misunderstand. The meaning of a text is not exhausted by its logical structure. Interpretation involves values, context, and personal engagement. Consequences for philosophy, science, and semiotics. Logical structure as objective. I'm just saying how many have we left. I'll be doing more videos. A bit between my teeth. Logical structure as objective. Scientific reasoning and formal logic would be universally agreed upon, provided all parties share the same definitions and data. But that's the thing, though. They wouldn't share the same definitions. Well, yeah, like I said, yeah, but here's the thing, though. If it was 100% external, then the people wouldn't really have different, because they wouldn't have the subjectivity, you see. But that's the thing. If thinking, there's a way of thinking about it that I didn't actually think about at the time or prompt it with it. That if thinking was 100% external, where is the subjective thinker? Is everyone just sharing common knowledge? Where is the idiosyncrasies there? Is everyone just sort of like a hive mind? There would be no subjectivity. I mean, could you have a different definition and thinking be external? Well, that's anyway. There's no point trying to think about that whilst I'm going through this video. Paradigm shifts and value disputes. Disagreements in science will be attributed to differences in values, priorities, or metaphysical assumptions, not due to subjective interpretation of logic. Yeah, the problem is, though, a lot of reasoning takes the shape of logic. That is the difference between a syllogism and an enthymeme. That is the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument. A valid argument has the sort of the shape of logic to it. No, a valid argument is defined as if the premises were true, then the argument would be it's valid. Whereas a sound argument is it's true because the logical structure is correct and the premises are true. Semiotics. Signs as fixed in logic. Yeah, they would be fixed. In the realm of logic, signs would have fixed objective meanings, unlike in other domains where signs are open to polysemy, that's multiple meanings, and reinterpretation. Everyday reasoning and social life. Consensus on logical reasoning. Everyday logical arguments would be resolved quickly if all relevant facts and definitions were shared. And if there weren't values opposed. Disagreements rooted in values opposed. Persistent disagreements would reflect differences in what people value or prioritize, not in how they interpret logic. Critical caveats and limitations. Right. Jung's view. Jung explicitly rejected the idea that introverted thinking is purely logical or external. He wrote, "Introverted thinking is not concerned with external facts as such, but with the subjective images they arouse." Did he really write images? I don't want to have to go through the book. That might be a hallucination. He might have been going on about introverted sensing, like that bit, because sometimes these FMCs do hallucinate. Its aim is to understand the world by means of subjective concepts, not by adapting to external reality. Yeah, so have a look at Jung's description of TI in Psychological Types. I wouldn't be able to find the exact point that quickly, especially if it's a. So I'm being honest here. Right, Jung also distinguished between syllogistic formal logic and enthymematic rhetorical that bit I recall. The introverted thinker type is not necessarily logical in the formal sense. His thinking is often more concerned with subjective principles than with objective facts. Okay, rhetorical reasoning. The distinction between syllogism and enthymeme. Yeah, that's coming from me because I remember putting that in my long prompt. The distinction between syllogism and enthymeme, yeah, defined by Aristotle rhetoric, shows that much human reasoning is based on probable premises, context, and subjective judgment, not strict logical necessity. Right, B. Socionics' theoretical problem, conflating TI with logic. Socionics, by defining TI as structural logic and equating it with external objective reasoning, ignores the subjective, personal, and context-sensitive aspects of introverted thinking described by Jung. Socionics' definition of TI as structural logic is a significant departure from Jung's, because he is a Jungian, Victor. Socionics' definition of TI as structural logic is a significant departure from Jung's original conception, which emphasized the subjective and personal nature of introverted thinking. This results in a theoretical cooking of the books. That's what I said to it. This results in a theoretical cooking of books where the definition of TI is adjusted to fit the internal-external dichotomy rather than reflecting the psychological reality described by Jung. Yeah, empirical evidence. Right. Again, this is what going towards what other fields are stating. So, you have to pick one. If you're picking socionics, then you're saying all these other fields are wrong. And then you also have to think about reality as well. And here's a way of thinking about it. If you really believe that socionics is right about thinking being external, I suggest you think about all of the times where you have a miscommunication with somebody and ask yourself, why is there a miscommunication? What is the reason for this? Am I saying what I mean? But there's the thing. If all thinking were external, what you say would be what you mean. What you say would be what you mean. But that contradicts semiotics, because what you say is a pattern of signifiers. What you mean is separate. Right, so cognitive science. Daniel Kahneman, I don't know, and Amos Tversky have shown that much human reasoning is influenced by heuristics. These are sort of like rules of thumb. Biases and subjective frameworks. Thinking Fast and Slow 2011. Communication studies. Deborah Tarnan's research demonstrates that even analytical, logical statements are interpreted through personal and cultural filters. You just don't understand 1990. Semiotics. Ferdinand de Saussure and Roland Barthes established that all signs, including those used in logical and analytic reasoning, are interpreted through subjective frameworks. Course in General Linguistics, 1916. Death of the Author, 1967. That I do not agree with. Death of the Author. Yes, there is because there is the authorial intent. I know what I intend. And then there's also how people can read it differently. It's a mixture of both. Consequences if Socionics' claim were true and testing against reality. If all thinking were external, logical and analytic statements would have fixed, universally agreed meanings. Yeah, that's it. There may be difference in values, but the meanings would be fixed and universally agreed because those meanings would be external. But what about, do you think everything in my mind is coming out towards you? Or if I listen to you, that everything in your mind comes out towards me? What you mean and what you say are different. Disagreements about logic would arise only from value differences or incomplete information. Subjective, context-dependent reasoning would not exist in analytic discourse. Literary and philosophical analysis of logical content would be purely objective. In reality, misunderstandings, reinterpretations, and subjective readings of analytic or logical content are common. Values, priorities, and context shape what aspects of a logical argument are attended to and how they are applied. Even in mathematics and science, debates about definitions, axioms, and the interpretation of results persist. See Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, 1962. Conclusion, objective assessment. So are there any more after this? I'm going to do a bunch more videos. It's the sources after that. Objective assessment. Steelman summary. If Socionics' claim that all thinking is external were true, logical and analytic reasoning would be universally accessible because it's external. What would be fixed, and immune to subjective interpretation. Disagreements would arise only from value differences or information gaps. However, this is not what we observe in reality. Both Jung's original psychology and contemporary research in cognitive science, communication, semiotics demonstrate that thinking, including analytic and logical reasoning, has a significant subjective dimension. Socionics' definition of TI as structural logic is a theoretical distortion that fails to capture the subjective, personal, and context-sensitive nature of introverted thinking. Therefore, the Socionics position is not supported by psychological theory, nor empirical evidence. The persistence of subjective reasoning, misinterpretation, and value-driven focus in logical discourse is proof that thinking cannot be exclusively external. Key references and quotes. Augusta, Galenka, Jung, Kuhnman, Tannen, whatever, Saussure, Barthes, Kuhn, Taylor, Gadamer, Aristotle. This analysis is exhaustive, objective, and directly addresses the theoretical and empirical issues with the Socionics position on thinking. It uses Socionics' own words as well as key academic sources to provide a rigorous Steelman and critique. Right, anything else? Right.